Good afternoon, everybody. I know that we're very sharp on time here, but they've told us to be sharp, so I might kick off and we'll welcome other guests as they arrive. So good afternoon, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to this session. Living and breathing health. Is it time for indoor air quality standards and a revolution on air pollution? My name is Bronwyn King. I'm a Special Advisor on Clean Air with Burnett Institute. And today I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of all of us present here today to acknowledge the traditional owners of Naarm, the peoples of the Kulin Nations on whose country we gather for this event. We pay our respects to elders past and present and elders of all First Nations communities joining us here today. We undertake to walk together with respect with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in a shared journey to better health and better health equity. We'd also like to extend our acknowledgement to all First Nations peoples and recognise their unique and enduring contributions to societies all over the world. It's such an honour to be chairing this session with 6 outstanding speakers here today. I'm biased, but I think that our topic is one of the hot topics in health in the world at the moment. Air is all around us. We breathe every 5 or 6 seconds, 11,000 litres per day. Clearly, having good quality air is fundamental to our health. And in 2022, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution explicitly stating that access to a clean and sustainable environment, including clean air, indoor and out, wherever you choose to breathe it, is not just a nice to have, but a fundamental human right. So what's the current status? And so could I please bring up my first slide? The first slide I've chosen to show you today is a slide from Melbourne, taken 3 weeks ago. For those joining us across the seas, this is a picture of the Melbourne cricket ground. But in Melbourne, that's too long for us to say. So we call it the MCG. But that's also too long for some of us to say. So we just call it the G. So this is a picture of the G, a footy game at the G, just 3 weeks ago. And something doesn't look quite right. And that's because just a couple of days before this game, there was a hazard reduction burn. And again, for people not familiar with bushfire management, in Australia, we have hazard reduction burns all the time, and it's where a selected patch of land is specifically burnt to reduce the risk of a catastrophic fire the next summer season. So we know that this happens. But when this happened, the enormous plume of smoke from country Victoria blew over the city of Melbourne. Most people didn't know much about it, except they could see that it looked a bit foggy. And most people don't really understand that it's not a great idea to breathe all this particulate matter into your lungs. And as a result of that, there is no behaviour modification or change. And 50,000 people turned up at the G and spent 3.5 hours breathing in hazardous air. Now, the issue of air quality is a global issue. This picture in the middle here, many of you will remember from last year. This is New York City being covered in hazardous air as a result of a wildfire burning in Canada, another country. But that smoke sat over New York City for weeks. It's also this isn't just a problem in high-income countries, this is a problem in low, middle-income countries, this is a problem everywhere. And just in the past 6 months, these are 2 interesting articles, alarming articles published in The Guardian. One about Delhi, where the air quality was exceeding World Health Organization limits over 100 times, and an article just a few weeks ago talking about how China needs to brace itself for increasing deaths as a result of air pollution. And with climate change, we're going to see more articles. We're going to see more alarming photographs because this will become more common. And what about indoor air? Until recently, indoor air has not been getting much attention at all, even though we spend 90% of our time indoors. Indoor air should be invisible. This is a stylised photo, so forgive me for this, but indoor air is usually invisible. For example, I can't see anything right now between me and wherever you are sitting in the audience. But there is no guarantee that between me and you, there are no pollutants or no pathogens. There's no guarantee. There are no indoor air quality standards that exist. And when I say pollutants, I mean things like chemicals from cleaning products, from furnishings, from building materials. If we're at a restaurant, what about the gas used on the stoves, or a wood fire heater, or a fireplace that's providing warmth? And if we're in an older style building with windows and had them open, would we have pollens coming in from outside making you all sneeze? Would we have vehicle emissions coming in? And what about that bushfire burning a couple of miles or kilometres away? And when it comes to pathogens, all pathogens that transmit through the air might be in this air, we just can't see them. So is there measles? Is there whooping cough, colds, flus, COVID? What about the next pandemic? And so what about the scale of this issue? 2 years ago, the WHO tried to determine what's going on with air, and they assessed the world using 6,000 different monitors in different cities across the world and decided that it was in fact 99% of the world's community, billions of us, are breathing unsafe air. And if we turn that around, we should think of it as an incredible opportunity, because if we can fix this problem, the impact is going to benefit everyone. Everybody has skin in this game. And the benefits of clean, healthy air are not just physical. When I started to get into this, I was very surprised, but it turns out that clean air is good for your brain. It's great for your brain. Your brain likes clean, safe air. It is good for your mental health. It improves your cognitive function. We know that workers who have clean air, they work better, they focus better. We know that school children and university students get better marks because their brains thrive on clean air. We also know that businesses have been studied, and some of the studies show a 1 to 4% uplift in business productivity. So there's many benefits that we need to look at. Now, before I introduce this panel, I just want to point out 5 highlights that have all happened recently in the world of clean indoor air. I told you it's a hot topic, it's very hard to keep up. So here are 5 things that have all happened in the last month. Number 1, a landmark paper on indoor air quality was published in Science. The lead author is sitting just here to my left, Professor Morovska. She published this paper with 42 colleagues from 40 universities from 17 countries after years of work outlining clearly why they believe we need to mandate indoor air quality standards. And often the problem has been people have said, okay, but what do you want us to do? What do you want us to measure? This paper tells us exactly what we need to do and measure. The same day Professor Morovska's paper was published, the World Health Organization, in partnership with CERN, that's the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, they published this fascinating tool, really first of its kind tool, that helps you assess your risk, this is specifically about COVID, of getting COVID in an indoor space. And I've had a bit of a play with this tool, and there are 13 different inputs that you need to put into this tool that will spit out your risk of getting COVID in that room. Now, it's very good in that there's 13 things. It is a bit tricky, I have to say. There's a bit of guesswork going on, and some of them are pretty crude. So, for example, when you're asked about ventilation, is there a window? It really is, are the windows open? It's not how big and how large and is there a cross breeze. So it's a little bit crude, but it's an excellent first step. It's really for building managers, health facility managers. They say it's for the general public. I personally think that's probably a bit of a stretch at the minute. But I did put in the calculations, imagining the risk of my son getting COVID at school if there was one other person in the class with COVID, one person. And this is what it told me, that his risk would be 42% if he happened to be sitting somewhere near the other child with COVID, and 8.5% if he was sitting far away. And so I will see what the headmaster of the school has to say when I have a conversation with him about this. But I think this is a really great tool, and the plan is to expand it to all other diseases that transmit through the air. Last week, the World Health Organization released a new consultation report. This was worked on by 41 experts across many disciplines for 2 years. And they propose updated terminology to describe how pathogens transmit through the air. Now, this has been a very sensitive topic over the past few years, but this great big group of experts came together and have agreed in principle on these new terms, which is a great sort of foundational piece that we can now sort of move on from. But you might see these new terms. These are the ones I learnt. Infectious respiratory particle, IRP. That's the thing that will come out of the mouth of an infected person with the virus on it. That's the name, the IRP. Puff cloud. Now, I kid you not, that is a very whimsical name for a scientific thing, but that is the name of the air expelled from your mouth and nose when you breathe out, a puff cloud. And through the air transmission, TTAT, it already has a nice little acronym, which means airborne transmission at any distance as well as direct deposition, and that's when the puff cloud throws an IRP, infectious respiratory particle, right into your eyes, nose or mouth. So just watch out for these new terms, which I'm sure we're all going to see much more of. 3 weeks ago, the USA announced a major research project to uplift indoor air quality across the US. Now, this is pretty groundbreaking stuff. They're looking at developing technology to directly detect pathogens in the air. I mean, imagine knowing, well, in this room there's measles. You know, wouldn't that be incredible? So they are looking at really cutting-edge stuff. They're also looking at very sophisticated software to help assess your risk when you go into indoor spaces. So watch this space. And the fifth and final thing I wanted to draw to your attention is that 2 weeks ago, an independent commission was launched. It's called Our Common Air. And this commission is led by some very esteemed leaders, the Right Honourable Helen Clark, who's been with us here over the last few days, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Dr. Swaminathan, the former Chief Scientist at World Health Organization, and a glitterati of World Health leaders. And their aim is to accelerate progress on improving air quality all across the world. So I told you have to keep up, right? There's a lot going on. And it's a very exciting time in clean air. So with all of that context, it's now my great pleasure to introduce the first of our speakers. Lydia Morawska is a distinguished professor, not a professor, a distinguished professor, and Australian Laureate Fellow at the Queensland University of Technology, where she's also the Director of the International Laboratory for Air Quality and Health. She has many other global roles, including as an advisor to WHO. She's received dozens of global scientific awards, and if you would like to read the list, I strongly recommend you get a big cup of coffee and set aside half an hour so you can get through it. My personal favourite is that in 2021, she was listed in Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people on the planet. It's such an honour to have you here today, Professor Morawska. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bronwyn, very much for your kind words, for your very good introduction to our topic, and to everyone who managed to, was influential of making this amazing event happen. It's been really amazing 2 days so far. It's time to mandate indoor air quality for public buildings. I worked on the topic of air quality, indoor and outdoor, for a very long time. In relation to indoor air, we just recently looked at the statistics, and we realized that we've published, with my team and colleagues within Australia and around the world, over 200 scientific papers in different journals on the topic of indoor air. But in the years leading to the pandemic, or before the pandemic, I basically gave up on the topic of indoor air. It was pretty much impossible to get any grants, research grants, to investigate indoor air or any aspect of this. And it was basically impossible to attract anybody's attention to this topic whatsoever. Of course, the pandemic has changed this. There is a full realization that there is a problem with indoor air across the society. But what is the problem? How to solve this problem? There are many different views on this. Now, to put it in the context of what can be done, I'll compare this to what I call pillars of public health. Water quality. It's extremely important. For 3 days without water, we wouldn't survive. But we don't have to think about the quality of the water we drink. We just go to the tap, fill up a glass. It's regulated. If I said, well, why won't you carry a little probe to test the quality of water, you would look at me like, well, she lost her mind. Well, the same with food. Without food, we can last a bit longer than without water. But again, we don't have to check the quality of food we buy in a supermarket. It is regulated. Similar with outdoor air quality. We don't have to check if outdoor air quality is regulated, is clean. Now, it's not that it is always clean. There are problems, but because if it is regulated, if there are problems, we can then bring this to the attention of the right people of the government, and eventually the problems are solved because it is regulated. But in relation to indoor air, which we breathe, inhale 90% of our time, because we spend 90% of our time indoors across different environments, 12 times a minute. Who knows what is the quality of this air? No one knows, because it is not regulated and anything can be in this air. So this is so astonishing that some cannot say, how come? It can't be like this. Well, let's put it in the context of air quality standards. If we are talking about outdoor air, we have two types of regulations: emission standards and air quality standards, performance standards. Across Australia, there are over 200 stations in different states monitoring outdoor air quality. Now, one could say, why do we need air quality performance standards? We have emission standards, so every vehicle imported to Australia has to meet emission standards. Every power plant has to meet emission standards. Every industry has to meet emission standards. So air quality is good. We don't need performance standards. Yet we have performance standards, and there are many occasions that we find out that something is not right, something's not working, and without performance standards, we would know that there is a problem. Now, in relation to indoor air, we have national construction codes. And often people say, well, we have construction codes, so that's fine. But firstly, construction codes do not include air quality. So this is not really part of construction codes. But that secondly, even if air quality was part of the construction codes, still, if something happened after the building was constructed, commissioned, and so on, who would know that there's a problem? So do we have performance standards? We do not have performance standard. So there's no monitoring whatsoever. Well, as Bronwyn introduced this, we've just recently published a paper which it is the main focus of the paper is not just say that we need standards. We said this pretty much in our previous paper 2 or 3 years ago. We are saying that it can be done, but it has to be done differently than it is being done for outdoor air. Now, for outdoor air, there are those 200 stations across Australia. How many monitors do we need for indoor air? In every space, in every indoor space. This space is different to the room next door. So it has to be in indoor space. This is telling us that very different approach has to be taken. And trying to simplify this or make it kind of trivial, like often we hear, well, it is as simple as open the window. Where's the window? So it is not as simple. It is quite complex. It is very complex, but it is possible scientifically and technologically, and that's what the paper is saying. So the paper is not just saying, well, we need to do it, but it's a blueprint for how to do it. I didn't include, there's a table there in the paper which presents the list of parameters, 3 pollutants, PM2.5, CO, CO2, and ventilation rate, including the concentration values of thresholds and averaging time. This is not the main, really, achievement of the paper agreeing on this. Every jurisdiction will do something different. They may choose different number of parameters, just not 4, 2, different values. The values, standard values, will be changing over time. The most important is it demonstrated it can be done, how to do it, how to justify it, what's the methods of doing. And this is a consensus of this over 40 people. So our goal to make clean, healthy indoor air the norm.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now on to Professor Zhu. Professor Tong Zhu is Boyer Chair Professor at the College of Environmental Sciences and Engineering from Peking University. He's a member of many prestigious science and medical academies in China and serves as a councillor to the State Council of the People's Republic of China. Despite the size of the enormous challenge in China, he's very pleased that China has seen a reduction in outdoor air pollution much, much faster than anticipated. And he notes that carbon neutrality could cut air pollution even further. We can't wait to hear more. Professor Zhu.
Thank you very much, Professor King. And as Lydia mentioned about it, it's very important for the indoor air. I fully agree with that. But I think both indoor and outdoor air pollution are closely linked. Now, if we can learn the lessons from what we have done to fight against outdoor air pollution, we may learn something from this and for the indoor air pollution control. About 12 years ago, China introduced PM2.5, we know the fine particles with size smaller than 2.5 micrometers, into its national ambient air quality standard, which is equivalent to WHO's air quality guideline inter-target 1, which is the most relaxed one. So it's about 35 microgram per cubic meter annual mean concentration. Once we have this standard, then we have the target, we have the goal. So government introduced, we call the National Action Plan on Air Pollution Prevention and Control, which was a 5 years action plan. And you can see here is a very crowded information. That means how many actions will be taken, targeted on capacity building or emission measures, also emission standards, and also legal regulating and also economic measures to make sure all these measures are being enforced by the government at the different levels. But only these measures are not enough. Scientific research is very critical for the successful implementation of all these measures. So in the meantime, government has invested more than 2 billion RMB for the research and to understand very comprehensively the interactions, very complicated interactions of physical, chemical processes in the atmosphere and also human behavior, like the emission, all kinds of emissions. So we try to bring all these factors into an equation, complicated like this one, to say one data, PM2.5 concentration in the air, actually is a function of so many parameters, and we need to consider about this one. Well, it's too abstract. One example I'll show you. That during the study, we use a digital model to simulate air pollution in Beijing and the surrounding area. One thing surprised to us is we found not only the power plant or industry, but the household use of solid fuel, which is coal and the biomass, for example, they contribute about 40% of PM2.5 in Beijing, which has now been recognized. So we point out this important source to control and also suggest to the government to promote the policy to reduce the household or residential use of coal in northern China, because in the wintertime, we tend to heat the home with this coal. So this is how it looks like the policy has been implemented. Whole comprehensive study in 2013 and 2021, and this for the residential use of coal control starting in 2018 and combined with the previous one with the power plants, industry, vehicle emission, etc. So I think to fight against air pollution, there's no magic bullet. We have to put everything together. With all the efforts, the good news is China has reduced air pollution in 7 years as much as US did in 30 years. This is Bromberg's report. So we see we are very happy, excited about this result, but still there's a challenge because we are almost three times now, or more than 7 times of WHO's new air quality guideline, which is 5 microgram per kilometer. So there's a long way for us to go. How can we deal with that? Well, there is an estimate that if we have the carbon neutrality to switch the energy from fossil fuel to more clean energy, we may be able to reduce PM2.5 to 10 microgram by 2060, the year China has a goal for carbon neutrality. And more importantly, by switching from the coal to the clean energy, we not only reduce outdoor air pollution, but more important for the indoor air pollution. So what we propose to reduce the controlled residential use of coal actually have a great health benefit for the people who use coal for the heating. So this benefit has not been appreciated before, and I think it's time to take it into consideration, especially when Lydia suggests that we put air pollution into our agenda for the future. With this one, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. Now we're moving on to Dr. Nick Jones. Dr. Jones is the New Zealand Director for Public Health. Over his 30-year career in public health, Nick has held many leadership roles, including co-chairing a healthy housing coalition. He also spent 4 years at the US Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, including leading a team developing national environmental health indications. But at heart, he's a muso. He's a former keyboard player in a funk metal band. And I'm told when the mood is right, at good parties, he still occasionally plays. You can find his music videos on YouTube, Spotify, or your preferred streaming service. Welcome, Dr. Jones.
I thought you weren't going to mention that, but look, thanks very much, and thanks so much for having me here. I do like to acknowledge the people of this country, the Ngāi country, and also I'd like to acknowledge the Māori people of New Zealand. And so I'd like to start off with an opening saying which I think is quite appropriate to this meeting. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makinakina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, e hika ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihe Māori ora. And that, by the way, says get ready for the westerly, be prepared for the southerly. It'll be icy cold inland, icy cold on the shores, and may the dawn rise red-tipped on ice, snow and frost. So I like the reference to the air quality there. All right, so I'm here to talk about indoor air quality work in New Zealand, and I firstly need to acknowledge that much of the work I'm talking about here has been done by particularly the Ministry of Education and colleagues in education, and I particularly wanted to acknowledge Renal Gronard, who's the Director of School Design, and Dr. Ian Langley, who's done some important work from NIWA. Just by way of introduction, Building Research Association of New Zealand began working on indoor air quality standards back in 2007 in recognition of the fact that our building code still has a very out-of-date ventilation requirement. 5% of the floor area of any given room must be allocated to a window that opens or some air input, and it's clearly inadequate and quite out of date. The Ministry of Education published updated standards in 2022 and made the adoption of them mandatory for all new schools. And these were developed with the advice of an Indoor Air Quality Research Centre and a Ministry of Education advisory panel, and would draw on the findings of research conducted into New Zealand schools. As a result of that, the Ministry of Education distributed 12,500 portable CO2 monitors and 13,000 portable air cleaners into schools as part of its COVID-19 control. That was the last slide. Let's move on to this. So in the standards, there is an interesting diagram here, which I just wanted to talk a little bit about briefly. So this talks about the level of 800 in terms of CO2 monitoring being the recommended standard. It does, however, note that in winter, there may be higher levels of CO2, and this is one of the conundrums of indoor air quality, where you're trying to balance out energy efficiency, thermal comfort, and ventilation. Down the bottom, you'll see some dimensions there which refer to performance in terms of school performance, total school, and as well as student achievement and also school absence. So one of the things that education is very interested in trying to achieve is obviously improve educational performance and outcome, as well as reduce absenteeism from the classroom. The standards themselves describe the need for actually cross-flow within classrooms. So you'll see up here on the top left where air comes in on one side of the room and is then exited through either a high window or through a window on the other side of the room. The bigger challenge is in winter, where the flows are probably lower because of the need to maintain heat, but they are also talking about that's the introduction of clean air cleaners and purifiers in that setting. Now I just want to move on quickly to the issue of communication, because I think there is a lot we can do in terms of education, and I'm just going to see whether this works.
So, what do you think?
It's freezing in here!
It is -4°C freezing. And what we're going to do is we're going to engineer a solution to take this freezing cold truck and connect it to our classroom so we can do a simulation of what some of our South Island classrooms might be experiencing. So who wants to help engineer a solution?
Yay!
We need to create a seal between the freezer truck and the classroom window to simulate the outside temperature you might find in chilly Invercargill.
That's
Great job, team. Okay, why don't we head back to the lab and talk to Ian about our next experiment.
Dr. Ian, in our last experiment, we got rid of the carbon dioxide and Jeremy breath by opening the windows. But what if it's cold outside?
So our research shows that the colder out it is outside, the less you actually have to open your windows to get the same cleaning effect.
And if we open the window less, it won't be as cold inside.
Exactly. Our calculations show that if you open your windows by maybe the length of your thumb, say 5 or 6 centimeters or so, and that will give you the same cleaning effects, but will stop loss of so much heat.
Cool, thanks Ian. Right, you know how this works. First we're going to need our baseline temperature measurements. Let's have a look at our sensors.
Well, it's 20°C inside the classroom, and it's -4°C outside.
Ooh, that's a 24-degree temperature differential. Now what we're going to do is fill up the room with our...
So I'll leave it there, but if you do get a chance to have a look at that, it's a great video. And Nano Girl, she's a terrific science communicator, so I think that's part of the solution. Now, I did want to just quickly mention the rental homes ventilation standard. We do have healthy home standards in our rental law, and I'll just go along to the next one. There is a ventilation standard. It's not particularly impressive, I have to say. It's primarily about reducing mould and dampness, but it does include extractor fans for kitchens and bathrooms, and those are the litres per second requirements. So finally, just the next steps in terms of New Zealand and where we're at. I think we are particularly interested in the impact of ventilation on the measles transmission risk at the moment. We do have low levels of measles vaccination coverage, and so there is a significant risk of transmission in schools. And we are hopeful that there is some hope from increasing the ventilation in terms of reducing the risk. There will be further work on buildings surveys, looking at focus actually now moving also into health, transport and other education settings, and looking potentially at some standards that could be adopted within health settings, general practice quality framework, and potentially even reviewing our building ventilation standards. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jones, and I think it's just wonderful to see Nano Girl up there. I have been following her closely, and I think the way she engages young people is just brilliant. So moving on now, we have Professor Karen Walker-Bone. Now, Karen first made a name for herself at the age of 17 as a finalist in the National Schoolgirls Tennis Championships of Great Britain, playing at the Queen's Club. But medicine narrowly edged out her professional sporting dreams, so she went on to train as a specialist in rheumatology. Karen arrived in Australia just 2 years ago and has led 2 major research projects about silicosis in workers in the stone benchtop industry here in Victoria, hence her passion for clean air in workplaces. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. May I first of all say what a privilege it is to be here with such a distinguished panel and with you, Bronwyn, and welcome to everybody here today. May I also pay my respects to any First Nations people who might be with us this morning. See if anything's going to happen. No. Aha, there he is. So this photograph was taken at work. This gentleman works here in Victoria. He's a stonemason. He works making, cutting and refining stone benchtops for kitchens and for bathrooms. He does that from morning till night, and he's been doing it for many years. But since the early 2000s, we've been importing a new form of stone into Australia called engineered stone. And what neither he nor any of the other workers in the workforce knew was that there was a much higher concentration of respirable crystalline silica in the new form of stone, roughly double the natural stone products they were used to working with. In consequence, they continued to do dry cutting rather than wet cutting, suppressing the dust, without adequate respiration and without adequate ventilation. This meant that those tiny, tiny particles of RCS could penetrate down to the alveoli, where they're literally not cleared successfully, promoting a long-term inflammatory reaction and creating autoimmune changes. This is silicosis. We have a current epidemic of silicosis here in Australia and also in many other countries in the world where the same stone benchtops are causing the same problem. Of all the things in our life that we do most of, after sleep, the next most high proportion of it is work, and therefore it is not acceptable for people to be put at risk in the workplace through pollutants such as silica dust. Here's another group of workers. This is from Southern Cross Station, the station just down the road here, where many, many of you may well have come through in the last few days. Just very recently in March, a recent report announced that there were 90-fold increased risks of nitrogen dioxide levels detected in New Cross Station, which was 90 times what the WHO would allow. Now, this is unacceptable for people walking through it with chronic health conditions. But these 2 people work there 40 hours a day, 7 days a week, so they're being exposed to it chronically, so their risk is even higher of that long-term pollution. One of the biggest problems, therefore, I put to you is that we need clean air in our workplaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And now moving on to Mr. Jithmar Benaragama. He's a digital executive who's been recognised as one of Australia's top 50 most innovative Chief Information Officers 3 times in the past 5 years. Recently, Jithmar led Victoria's digital transformation agenda, culminating in the establishment of Digital Victoria, the state's transformation agency. Jithmar will be sharing private sector insights on clean indoor air. Welcome.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Amazon, the company that I'm with currently, and what we've been doing in terms of indoor air quality monitoring. So the professor sort of said one of the same things that I was going to say, which is, on average, people spend about 90% of their time indoors. And so for our employees, that's a huge chunk of their time in the office, coming and working in the spaces that we provide. And through the pandemic, we saw a lot of the risks of substandard indoor air quality. And at the same time, what we're seeing is climate change. So increased bushfires, increased floods, which are in turn causing impacts to air quality, externally and also internally. And so what our team did, and this is our facilities team who are based in the US, really spent some time thinking about what would good indoor air quality look like for our business and how might we achieve it. They wanted our employees and visitors to come to our spaces and feel safe and be confident in the time that they were spending there. And so out of that was born our indoor air quality program. The program relies on the cloud and digital technologies, and so Amazon Web Services, as a backbone of a tool that's been used to gather data from a range of different IoT devices, so sensors, deployed within our building spaces. The cloud and how cloud works makes it much easier for that data to be gathered and then for innovation to happen. And this technology, coupled with broad moves in sensor technology, like the ones on the desk over there, have made it far easier and cheaper to start thinking about how you might gather this data, but then also how you might analyse it. As the team who were running the work in Amazon started thinking about how you might go about deploying an indoor air quality program within the business, they thought that the best way to do it was to start from the bigger spaces. So progressively, they've been rolling out indoor air quality monitoring throughout all of our different headquarter buildings, starting from the big ones and then progressively getting to smaller and smaller buildings over time. And each one of those implementations gives them an opportunity to test and learn. And what we're finding is that in some of the spaces, they're owned and operated by us, and others we are tenants, like many other organisations. And so what we're learning is how you might integrate with and work with all different types of HVAC systems and building management systems and the like, to try and get to a point where you might be able to not only monitor but also manage air quality. And so for us, over the course of 2 years, we've installed about 20,000 sensors across the buildings within which we've managed to implement the program. And there's more sensors coming on day in, day out. The beauty of this work is that it's definitely helping in terms of how we're managing indoor air quality. But what we're also doing is creating another source of data that can be used by us and others. And other tools that can be used by ourselves and others. And so an example that I might give you in that regard is last year during the energy crisis in Europe, we were able to use our indoor air quality monitoring infrastructure to start thinking about how we might help to reduce energy consumption and pressure on the energy grid in the EU. And so all we did was we turned our temperature controls down by 1 degree. And using the IAQ sensors, we were able to actually understand when these changes have happened, and then be able to manage and monitor our temperature and therefore energy consumption, which then allowed us to help reduce energy consumption across the multitude of buildings that we operate within that region. For us as well, as we roll out this program, there's a lot that we're learning. As I said, we're learning about building management systems. We're also learning about limitations in the technology that exists currently. And so how well are these systems actually, how well is the program of these systems coming through and doing what they're supposed to do? And so what our IAQ program allows us to do is to effectively have tools that we can use to be able to say, hey, we actually need to think about augmenting this particular function or system within the way the building is being managed. And for us, that leads to another opportunity. And so as you start thinking about the confluence between big data and data analytics and where that's going in terms of AI and generative AI, we're seeing opportunities where you can start using our monitoring systems, our analytics systems to then start allowing for proactive monitoring and augmentation of air quality within our spaces. The program itself has had challenges. What we're talking about is sensors that are taking readings every sort of 5 or so minutes. And so when you think about that over 20,000 sensors and the like, you're talking about millions and millions of data points. And so for us, as we look at this, the opportunities and then also the problems of dealing with large data sets are ones where we feel that there's broader opportunity. For us going forward, when we think about this program and we think about where it might go, again, we see a confluence between the issues of climate change, the issues of health and health monitoring, but also the needs that, the commitments that our organisations and others have made around trying to reduce impact on climate. And so how might we use the sensors and the data and everything else that we're collecting through our IAQ program to start trying to allow us to be more, to hit some of the goals that we're setting around sustainability and the like. Thank you.
Thank you, Jithma. And now our final speaker is Dr. Claire Looker. She's Victoria's Chief Health Officer and the Chief Human Biosecurity Officer for Victoria. She was a Deputy Chief Health Officer for Victoria in the COVID-19 response. She's made numerous excellent social media videos educating the public about protecting themselves from COVID. And she doesn't know this, but in 2023, I gave her my personal Gold Star Award, it's very hard to get that, by the way, for coining the best slogan for air quality awareness: fresh air is your friend. I just think that's brilliant. So thank you, Claire, and it's a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks very much, Bronwyn. Maybe I could just use those few words and that would be my presentation for today, but I'm conscious of time. Of course, I'd also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on unceded lands and to pay my respects to the traditional owners and to any Aboriginal elders or colleagues that are with us in the room today. So I think we've heard pretty clearly indoor air quality is obviously important. I think today's session in part recognises that increasing focus across many sectors, and I think we're also hearing very strongly that it's clearly something that needs a multi-sector approach, and that includes public health. So I'm here to just touch on some of the attention that we've been giving that, both at the state level, but also some of the concerns that we have more broadly if we take that public health lens to it. So specifically in Victoria, some of the recent work in this space, or recent, the last couple of years, has been how we manage the carbon monoxide risks associated with particularly unflued gas heaters, and some pretty unusual steps that were taken here around the regulation of that, but very important, and following some very tragic outcomes from people with high levels of exposure at home. We also have a key role in providing information and advice to the community on how to protect their health and their safety from other factors related to indoor air quality, like mould, and also trying to balance things like thermal comfort. And of course, also for our SINs, we've all been very heavily involved in the COVID-19 response and the attention that rightly, I think, well, not I think, I know, drew on air quality as well. I think we have heard that indoor air quality is complex, and I won't, I think Bronwyn gave a fantastic outline of all the different factors that contribute to that, and therefore why we need this multi-sectorial approach. You can be affected by the infiltration of outdoor air factors. We've got internal sources of pollution, such as that can then become more concentrated when we have poorly ventilated buildings. I think you also mentioned that the pollutants that we can get from indoor building materials. We've mentioned things like gas heating, wood-fired stoves, but also lots of different airborne particles, fungi, spores, house dust mites, etc. We also, following a significant epidemic thunderstorm asthma event back in 2016, we have now instigated a much more sophisticated system in the state for monitoring epidemic thunderstorm asthma risk that includes very close monitoring of the pollen load, and we've had very good engagement from community as part of that with a number of different partner agencies. And then, of course, there's all the pollutants that are produced by people. So the bacteria, the viruses, and then also the carbon dioxide that we all share as we're in a little room like this without windows. We know that this is all linked. You know, there's strong links between lots of air pollutants and health conditions, and I won't list those again. But I think, like many, or arguably all hazards that we deal with in public health, the impacts of these don't affect us equally across the population, and there are groups that are far more disadvantaged by the impacts. We know there are people who are particularly vulnerable and sensitive to the effects, such as those with pre-existing health conditions, those with heart and lung disease, particularly infants, younger children, older people and pregnant women. We also know that in addition to there being a difference in how sensitive people are to the impacts, there's also a difference in exposure levels. We've heard those, you know, particularly pronounced, particularly in those occupational sessions, in that very powerful reflection on the impact of silica in engineered stone. But even just at a high level in terms of the amount of time people spend indoors, data suggests that, you know, women spend much more time indoors than men, or many more women spend more than 80% of their time indoors than men. And perhaps not surprisingly, that as people get older, they're also spending more time indoors, getting more exposed to many of these hazards, and also being in a stage of life where they are more vulnerable to the effects. We also know that there's lots of inequities in housing, and I think Nick spoke to some of those. People with lower socioeconomic demographic areas often have the more poorly maintained rental accommodation, leading to greater exposure both to those internal and outdoor pollutants, and often that can be on the background of other underlying health conditions. And of course, the big existential overlay, or not existential problem, but overlay of climate change being such a huge threat so broadly. We know that this will increase the intensity and frequency of many of the environmental hazards that lead to outdoor pollutants, and things like exposure to smoke. Also increases in floods, increase of ingress into homes, causing issues around dampness and mould. And also the extreme weather events, the heat, particularly in our setting, driving people to spend more time indoors, more time with air conditioning on, and potentially less time with windows open. Finally, I think I'd be a little remiss, so I'm conscious of time, but just not to reflect also, of course, on COVID. I think as others pointed out, indoor spaces really took prominence during the course of the pandemic. had cause the other day to reflect the great uncertainty, it's surprising now, that we had in 2020 about some of the modes of transmission, the very determined focus we had on droplet transmission as opposed to aerosolisation, but suffice to say that understanding of the virus and how it behaved grew very rapidly over the course of the pandemic. And we very quickly came to see that indoor environments that were crowded and poorly ventilated clearly drove transmission. I think it is a very interesting space now, and I know lots of faces here that are heavily involved in this work, but as we do move towards sort of the virus really being endemic and juggling with that, perhaps diminished social licence for restrictive interventions, we know there's an ongoing significant burden of disease, and we are faced with real challenges about how do we continue to engage community around that, but also have proportionate risk mitigations in place, particularly when we know that the strength of evidence around the importance of safe indoor air. I have a few other notes, but I'm very conscious that we're running quite close to time here, so I wonder if perhaps we'll hand over to questions, and then, but happy to, obviously, looking forward to keeping the conversation going through those.
Fantastic, thank you.
Beautiful.
If I could just have the, thank you. If you can just have the microphones on now, I don't know how they turn on. I'm told it's magic. I'll just raise my voice in case. But now we'll have just an opportunity for, is this on? Yes? Is it on? I don't know. Hello? Is it on now? Hello? Okay, great. Now we're just going to have a moment for some discussion amongst us before we go to questions, but I've been told I must leave the last 20 minutes for questions for the audience. So please, while we're having a chat, please think up your questions for our experts here today. I'd just like to start off by asking Professor Moravska a very tricky question, which is that the issue of clean indoor air is not just a health issue. We heard Dr. Jones talk about the Education Department in New Zealand being heavily involved. We know that the Environment Department is very involved. We know that architects and facility managers and the National Building Code has been mentioned. We know that public transport is important. In your experience, where does this issue belong? Which portfolio needs to own the issue? Because it's very hard to create change when no one is the owner.
Well, this is the question, the very question. This depends, of course, on the country, on the state, and there are lots of discussions about this happening. I was recently in Washington and talked to colleagues from the US EPA. It appears that there it could be simpler because the Department of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has already, and has it for a long time, division of indoor air. So it may be simpler, but not necessarily. Here in Australia, there is no government body as such which owns indoor air, nor that there is a body which would like to own indoor air. So this has been our discussion since last year, where it belongs. There were some saying that it belongs to health. Many of us don't think that this is health department which should be responsible for this. Of course, there are health guidelines, health recommendations, but not necessarily health departments. Other option would be environment, and there would be logics into this, because indoor air is affected by outdoor air. Outdoor air is monitored by the environment. However, it's called in different states. So environment. I don't think there's a big appetite from the environment side to own indoor air. Well, another look at this is occupational bodies, however they are called in different states. After all, and we are talking about public buildings, every public buildings, public space is also an occupational space. So from the occupational point of view, this is a potential and perhaps the biggest potential. But there's a lot of work yet to get a government body to own this space.
Thank you. And Dr. Jones, I wonder if you have a view on that in New Zealand. Where does this belong?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? And I think there probably is more than one place. Firstly, in terms of the workplace, we have a regulatory body called WorkSafe, so clearly they have an important role. But I think in other Other places where public spaces, where people are visiting, there's always a bit of a tussle over who's got jurisdiction in those places. And I think the starting point is probably to get the agreed performance standard recognised under whichever legislation is the most appropriate for the jurisdiction. And probably in New Zealand, it probably would be through the Ministry for Business, MB, Employment and Innovation, and they would probably, that would be through the building code, so it would be a performance standard. I think the bigger question is who's going to enforce it? And I suspect, actually, it's us, the people, who would be enforcing it, because if we are all aware of the importance of it, then we could be actually self-enforcing it. And I think this is one of the challenges, right? I mean, you can have a requirement to have sensors in the room, but what if they're not turned on? You can have a requirement to have an air, some kind of air cleaning device, but it could be not turned on. So, I think the enforcement question is equally challenging. And
Professor Zhu, if I may ask, I saw in your presentation you have these very sophisticated slides of all the things that we currently do on outdoor air quality. And I just wonder, what can we learn from that degree of sophistication in outdoor air quality for indoor air quality? And should we be looking at these issues a bit more closely together?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. There's two issues that are very much closely related to, first, the source for the air pollutants. And many times they tend to have the same source for the outdoor, indoor, especially in countries like China. We had in northern China for the heating and the cooking. You generate not only outdoor pollution, but also indoor exposure for this one. So switching to a much cleaner sources or reduced source that can deal with both indoor, outdoor air pollution. And the second one is the outdoor pollution could be penetrate into indoor and vice versa. So how to look at the ventilation, for example, to deal with outdoor and also indoor. Because if you combine the ventilation and the filtration of air, and you can help to reduce indoor air pollution. And same thing if you have some indoor source, and there's, for example, we use the coal stoves for cooking or heating, and the filtration reduce air pollution from that could also help reduce outdoor air pollutant. But I think eventually we will look at into future, the climate change ask for the carbon neutrality, so switch to cleaner energy. That's the eventual solution for that.
Thank you. And Professor Walker-Bone, what's your view on potentially occupational health and safety being the owner of indoor air quality?
Yeah, very encouraged by the comments of my predecessors here. I do think that in general societies have a poorer tolerance of hazards in the workplace than when individuals have choice over smoking or whatever it is. So I think that is a place where we could start, and some countries are so well regulated in terms of OH&S structures that they're better placed to start enforcing things. The WHO and the ILO jointly released a report 2 years ago that estimated that 2 million lives are lost globally because of occupational hazards, and the second biggest cause is particulate matter. So there's a real need to do something, and I think that would be a good way to proceed in this problem.
Fantastic, thank you. And Mr. Benaragama, your views on the data. You mentioned a lot about data, and obviously Amazon's very good at data and innovation and data crunching. I was wondering, you spoke a little bit about what's next and sort of the possibilities for automation, and it made me think of in public places when you go to the bathroom and the bathroom's all dark and then you walk in and bang, the lights come on. Do you think we'll get to a place where we can walk into a room and the air purifiers will detect that we've walked in, and it will detect that actually 10 of us walked in, so that it gets to a certain setting that's just automatically happening behind the scenes?
Well, the ability to detect people walking into spaces and stuff, that already exists. Yeah. I think the best way to describe this, it's a patchwork. And the real sort of focus is going to be about how do you bring that patchwork together. So you've got sensors that you can install quite easily, and you can start to gather data, and you can stick that into the cloud, and then you can run a bunch of analytics. Where it gets hard is taking that analytics and doing something with it. and both through, so the nirvana is getting to automation where that, where the augmentation happens straight away because, as you said, the buildings recognise that 10 people have walked into a room, potentially 10 people have walked in a room, one of them was cold, right? Like that you could get to that. But it's allowing for something to happen after that. And that is then trying to integrate this sensor data in with the HVAC systems and the building management systems and all of those, because those, there's a lot of work to try and go through that integration process. And there's multiple different versions of them and everything else. That's probably one area of like peak complexity to try and work through to try and get to that point.
Well, it's an exciting possibility, so we're watching closely. And Dr. Looker, I want to go back to fresh air as your friend, because I think of it a little bit like Slip, Slop, Slap, which was an Australian SunSmart campaign. And I think of it in terms of, you know, some of our drink driving campaigns, anti-drink driving campaigns, our anti-tobacco campaigns. What do you think we can learn from these other very successful public health campaigns when we're thinking of a pretty new issue for a lot of people, this idea of air quality? What can we learn? How can we do air quality well?
So, I mean, I think as we've heard, you know, wherever we nest management of this as a problem and agreeing that it's going to require lots of collaboration, we won't get anywhere without community engagement and with various forms of different mitigation. So I think I think there are some good examples out there, and I think COVID, for all obviously the very awful aspects of it, it did leave us with a legacy of a community who demonstrated how they can and are really keen to engage in public health data, and also I think in very sort of dynamic risk of, assessments. I think where there is an opportunity, and we see it done very well in the emergency management sector, we see it particularly in the fire risk space, that where people are sort of watching, that there's always a risk of warning fatigue, isn't there? And so if we sort of hammer people, you know, too much with messages about what to do to look after themselves, they tend to start to turn off from those and become more numb. But I think where you can engage people, and I think there's lots of really good innovative examples of this in what's changing in air quality. What factors can we share with community about what the air was like that day at the MCG? And obviously this work happens already through in Victoria through EPA, but you know, I think there's opportunity to really refresh how we deliver that to community. So and you know, whether there's certain phrases and things that can hook people along the way, or whether we use a coloured rating system to do that, or there's lots of others who are much more expert in that sort of area than myself. But I think there is probably giving the community kind of due regard to the amount of to the science that people are willing to sort of engage with. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, I know that we've got 20 minutes to go, so we're going to go to questions from the audience. We will have some roving microphones if you'd like to put your hands up. And to our microphone guy, he has to actually get 2 of these back because we've stolen all the microphones in the centre. So there we go. We're going to share while you can have them. But if you would like to ask some questions, I think this gentleman over here at the back had one. There's also Ted Bailey at the front. But please.
Kia ora koutou. My name's Tony Blakely. I'm a public health medicine specialist and epidemiologist here at the University of Melbourne. I also chair the New Zealand Royal Commission of Inquiry on COVID-19, and I did modelling during the pandemic on COVID. My question is a really hard one at the intersection of my Royal Commission hat and the modelling hat. And the question basically is, imagine, let's say Victoria, 2019. We're only going to make one change to it. We're going to improve in a resource-realistic way the ventilation and filtration in public spaces, schools, work offices, pubs, train stations not so much, but the places where we go to where there's a gathering. My question is, by how much will that reduce the R0? How much will that reduce the infectiousness? It's a really hard question. I don't think anybody's done it yet, but as a chair of a commission, it's something I have to think about when we're going to make recommendations about ventilation that people like Dr. Nick Jones have to go and work with once we've done that. I'll open the bidding. I reckon that an intervention like that might lower the R0 by about 20%. Now that would be a worthwhile gain. Think back to Wuhan, R0 of 2.5, that'll take it down from 2.5 to 2, and that will give you more room for your contact traces and stuff to deal with it. It ain't going to be no panacea for Omicron, if we believe it's 10, which only takes it down to 8, but with a lot of infection stuff, it'll still be important. But I'd be really interested in what this panel's expert reflections are, or guesses are, on how much resource-realistic improvement in ventilation would improve or lower that R0. Sorry for the hard question.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we just get another question as well? Did you have a question, Ted? I just might grab 3 and then we'll go along the panel. Could someone bring a microphone to Ted down here at the front?
I might not need a microphone.
Okay, you may not. All right, go for it.
I've got another question, so I'll say for later. But Nick and Claire are the closest thing we've got to decision makers on the panel. So simple question. How much closer are we to getting revised international air quality indoor standards?
Okay, there's a big question. And any more? Is there another one from the audience? Anyone else like to ask a question? All right. Oh, yes, the lady here. Oh, there's 2 ladies here. We'll take both of those and then we'll go along. Yep. Go ahead.
My question just sort of follows on. Trams and trains, when are they going to do something about that? Of putting, I don't know what filter, I don't know what they will do, but I got my 2nd dose of COVID from a packed tram. I didn't have a mask on, but they need buses. There's a lot of people. We're encouraging people to come into the city, you know, come by public transport, but nothing there. I won't go on about buildings and all of that's happening, but trams, buses and trains. Is that
Thank you.
Going to...
Thank you.
Is the state government going to do it? Is the council, local council?
It's a great question. One more and then we'll go to the panel. No, this lady just here. Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Atsuko Ikeda from Hokkaido University, Japan. And we have done several indoor air quality study as well, so I very much appreciate these topics. And my question is about the guideline for indoor air. It might be very important, but at the same time, lots of spaces belongs to the personal, the private. So not only the guideline, but the inhabitants' awareness and also like ventilations. Maintenance and kind of thing is also very important. So how do you think the guideline and awareness can be combined to improve the indoor air qualities?
Okay, thank you. So you were talking about private settings, so private homes and private business as well as all the public settings. Okay, all right. I might start with you, Lydia. I'll hand this over, but just you might respond to any. Pick your favourite question and let us know what you think.
Well, all the questions are my favorite questions.
I know.
Talking about the economy, we were trying to do this kind of analysis through an application for ARC research grant in 2014, specific of infection transmission, and assessors concluded that airborne transmission is not possible. This was exact wording. That's why we didn't do such analysis. But if we look at different assessments over the year of different aspects, like for example, CSIRO report in 1998 about indoor air quality not taking into account infection transmission, it accounted for $1.2 billion losses to the Australian economy due to impacts of indoor air quality. There are data on how many influenza cases and other cases of respiratory infections happen every year in Australia. The assessment is that at least half of this could be prevented in public spaces by better ventilation. Again, this can be calculated. But this economic analysis is something which is the key right now, which we are trying to do. But on the other hand, there's no doubt that it will significantly reduce infection, improve health. Certain things don't necessarily have to be proven through this kind of analysis. The fact that gravity works, we don't have to prove this. The fact that if we remove the virus from the air, it won't infect. It is kind of similar to this. In terms of international standards, I don't think there can be international standards which can be mandated. There's no international body which has which has a mandate over an individual countries. They could be international guidelines, and WHS has guidelines for air pollution, including indoor and outdoor pollution. But standards and mandating, it is national. And otherwise, we are talking about standards for public buildings, not private spaces. Not that private spaces don't matter, of course they don't matter, but we cannot enforce, mandate standards for public buildings, like we cannot ban people from smoking indoors. So the idea is that what we are putting, that buildings should be designed such that they would meet the standards, but we cannot mandate this. And actually one point which we are talking about, turning air purifier and doing this, we are talking about little things to improve this situation right now with buildings which are not necessarily designed to ensure good indoor air quality. Our mind, with colleagues, we are working on how to better design buildings for the future, so the buildings also consider indoor air quality is also part of the building operation.
Okay, a few questions I would like to address. First, as a scientist for atmospheric chemistry, we're very much disappointed when the UN's global sustainability goal doesn't include clean air. We all know that clean air should be a human right. And so we will promote to have clean air. And then it comes to the point, we have ambient air quality guideline, as Nidia mentioned about WHS release one. But if we are going to have indoor air quality guideline, I think it very much depends on the research generating enough evidence. Now, health-related from the normal air pollutants like PM or ozone or gases, very much borrowed from the outdoor research, epidemiology knowledge. And we need a larger scale research on indoor to make sure that we have comprehensive and robust evidence. But in the meantime, we can borrow what we have from the outdoor research. So for example, in China, our health commission has introduced indoor air quality, we should not call it standard, more like the guideline, and borrow this from outdoor. So I think it is a good start for us, and there's more to come. When it came for, Lady mentioned about the train, and now I think in the big city like Beijing, we may be more concerned about subway. There's more than 10 million people travel each day, spend 1 or 2 hours. So their exposure to the air, indoor air, it could be not only infectious disease or a virus, but also particles generated by the train itself and the pollutant with that. So there's some groups started to do the study on this one, and I hope that in the future we can also include subway into what we consider about indoor air. Okay, thank you.
Just remind me if I forget any of the questions. I think the first one about reducing the R0. My understanding from reading your paper on the plane over the way over was that we could effectively, with 14 litres per second per person, reduce the R effective to less than 1 if there was one case of Omicron or measles in a classroom, for example. So, Tony, I don't know whether that helps you, but I think potentially it could be quite a significant... Yes, 1 setting. But I do think it's something we seriously need to consider, because it is obviously far less rights infringing than many other things which we might want to do in terms of pandemic control. Moving on then to the question around what was the second one? Standards, the adoption of standards. Yes, of course, you're right. International, there's no body that can approve an international standard. We do have the WHO guidelines. I think the work that you've just published is incredibly helpful and will, I suspect, promote consideration by government in terms of adoption as a national standard. But I do think it's about the performance standard rather than the building code. And obviously the building code can actually help protect in the private setting as well, but it's unlikely that we would ever be able to actually enforce that in the private setting. And the question that we talked about previously was how do you actually go about enforcing it? And I think all governments are going to think about this from multiple dimensions. Is it cost effective? Is it going to be feasible? Is it going to be acceptable politically? These are all things that are going to be considered in terms of any adoption within any particular jurisdiction. And then there was one other question, I think. Transport question, yes. So we have had some initial discussions with the New Zealand Transport Authority around what tools they may have. I think it may be easier in buses to introduce ventilation requirements than in trains or in trams, but yeah, and unfortunately we're predominantly a bus public transport system, so that's something that area of actively being considered.
Thank you. I thought I might pick up the transport question. First of all, with sympathy to you for catching COVID a second time in a packed tram. I have to say my big worry is the people who are driving those trams, who are on that tram all day, every day, plus the train drivers and any other public transport worker. Not only are they at risk of the infected area, but also at the risk of diesel fumes in the air that's polluted also, and they're sitting there all day. We already know they're a vulnerable population because they're so sedentary. So to me, regulating the air on the trams is urgent, but for them as much as anybody else.
I think of all those questions, the one that I might be able to add a little bit of commentary to is around the private-owned spaces. And I'm thinking particularly of buildings. So when it comes to managing and monitoring air quality, yeah, it's great for your staff and giving them a safer environment to work in. But it's also like just good business. So if I think about, if I am an owner of one of the big buildings on the other side of the river over there, and when you look at occupancy rates of large commercial real estate right now, I think all of them are looking for an edge. They're looking for what's the message that they can give to the market about why their building is better than the one next door, because most of them aren't very well occupied right now. So I think there's sort of like that macro story about commercial real estate, but then you can take that down into the application and use of that real estate. So if I, for example, own a supermarket or a shop at the bottom of one of those buildings, if I can tell customers that they can come in safely into that space because I'm really conscious of managing the air quality and monitoring it and making sure that I'm keeping my shop safe and as a place that anyone can come into, particularly so people who might have pre-existing issues or whatever else. That, I think, is just really good business. It's going to mean that more people will come into my shop because they feel safer coming into the space that I provide. And then you can sort of drag that same example into whether someone comes and works in the office, my business's office, or someone else's, because ultimately people have choices. They have lots of choices now about where they go and what they do and where they work, where they shop and everything else.
Thanks. I don't know that I have a lot more to add to the tricky Arnott question than Lydia and Nick, but I was prompted to reflect on what we observed in 2020 in managing COVID in Victoria as it started to take off, and partly, there was huge demand on the system because of the case numbers that we were dealing with, but also we very quickly saw that the transmission dynamics were very different in a number of different settings, and we moved to a system where we had specific outbreak teams focused on meatworks and abattoirs, because we knew there was a unique risk, and we were seeing very different patterns in how the virus was being transmitted there. We had a group focused on aged care, and we know the horrible burden there, but equally education and healthcare settings. So I think there probably is lots, whilst it's not sort of quantified in quite the same way as some of the work that was referred to earlier. I think we can look at the different risk mitigation that was used in those different settings and the impacts that they had, and part of that might be sort of a bit more qualitative, but I think it would still be of value. The thorny question also about indoor air quality standards. I think a significant update or progress last year was NHealth, so the National Environmental Health group that sits under AHPPC, released standards around outdoor air quality and particularly around messaging for landscape fires and how to try and ensure consistency between jurisdictions in how we were messaging the risk related to various levels of particulate matter in the air. I think there is, opportunity to do something similar or with better, visibility of local communities around indoor air. It won't obviously have the same levers as something that is mandated, and that I equally share the enthusiasm for that, but recognise it'll be a complex piece to build, and pragmatic optimist, but I don't think it's sort of an immediate thing that's got to develop locally. I think it would have to be led nationally, but I think the more consistency and the more we can increase community understanding of the risk associated with different levels of exposure, not only hopefully allows people and sort of empowers people to take steps to mitigate that risk, but I think it also settles some of the concern that we see. People can get very anxious about what may actually be a very small exposure, and hopefully it would also address some of those concerns and again provide consistency in the messaging across different sectors. The question about public transport, again, I reflected to think, or prompted to think about. I think we had in Victoria the voice of my predecessor beamed over public transport for a few months there, so I'm not sure that Brett is quite so willing to have that done again. But I do wonder, obviously there's pragmatic things in certain transport types like trams around opening windows, but again, would we get better engagement if that's a sort of a dynamic piece that we know when there are times of increased transmission, for example, from COVID, or as Nick's referenced, the concern at the moment in New Zealand around measles, that there's sort of an amplification of that messaging around the importance of opening windows, but then also that we step back from that in times of lower risk, not because there's ever a time of no risk, but I think it just means that you probably do get better engagement.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claire. We only have a couple of minutes, and unless there's a burning question, I'm just going to invite everyone in the audience to give a quick last-minute thought, so that when our audience is flying home all across the world and they're, cruising at 38,000 feet, what would you like them to think about as they make their way home? I might start with you, Claire, if I can, so that we can give Lydia the final word.
Look, I think it's thinking about the simple steps that you can do in the spaces that you spend lots of time in. So what can you do in your home space? What can you do in education settings and work settings? So what is within your power to change? Because I think there is a lot in that space. So I think it's, really encouraging people to think, to do that own risk assessment locally.
Thank you.
I might just build on that and sort of comment on that as a business. So, as Claire said, do that work to understand the risks, the opportunities and the like within the spaces you provide. And like us, we thought it was something that was really important for our business and for our staff, and then found a way to start implementing a global program.
I guess I would like to kind of put it to the power of the people a little bit more. I think that the point Nick raised earlier about actually raising awareness of how important this is.
Fantastic.
It strikes me that we've known about the importance of fresh air for a long time, and we used to do it quite well in terms of buildings. We had lots of fresh air, and then we started tightening them all up because we wanted to be energy efficient. So I'm not sure, how we reach the new balance, but this has been a well-known issue for public health for a long time, so it's good to be returning to it.
So on the way, we're moving to a carbon neutral society. I think the pathway we need to find to maximize health benefit from the air pollution and climate change. Here, the air pollution includes both indoor and outdoor air pollution.
I'm hoping that time will come that we will not have to carry individual monitors on the plane, on the bus, or anyway, and wondering what the air quality is. I'm hoping that the time will be such that we won't have to think about this at all, that it will be covered by standards. It's not going to happen voluntarily, by voluntary approach, because we will never know what are they telling us, that this is a market business. It just has to be standardized, and I hope it will happen.
Thank you so much. So thank you to everybody on the panel, and I would invite everybody to thank our panel for their time and effort and expertise. That brings our session to a close, so please stay around and continue the conversation with our panellists as they make their way out, and we really hope you enjoyed the session, and thank you for your time today. Bye-bye.